Hey everyone, it's Quickie Baby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be talking about what probably is the worst tier 10 vehicle, at least if you want to be competitive in World of Tanks at tier 10, and yeah, it's a German light tank. Are you very surprised? This is the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, and it has been in the game since the tier 10 light tanks were introduced. Now, when this vehicle first went into the game, it had 360 alpha damage with its 105mm. However, Wargaming, when they changed the light tanks pretty much the very next patch after they were introduced, decided to lower the alpha damage of this vehicle to 320. Yeah, definitely not the best alpha for a tier 10 vehicle, right? But at least they did increase the rate of fire, they improved the aim time, they improved the dispersion values when you're turning the tank and when you're also turning the turret. And so it was kind of a nerf, at least with regards to alpha, but other aspects of the vehicle more than made up for it. And I definitely think that with the dispersion value improvement, there's no doubt that it was kind of a buff to the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. However, other light tanks, such as the AMX 13105, the Sheridan, they just flat out gained alpha damage. Their alpha damage went from 360 up to 390 instead of going down from 360 to 320, and their rate of fire pretty much stayed the same, just all around buffing the vehicles. And so, while all of the other light tanks kind of got better, apart from the WZ-1321, but when the light tanks first came out, that was by far the best one, with 390 alpha, decent turret armor. Yeah, it was a very solid pick. But all of the other light tanks got better, leaving the WZ behind, and arguably the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen just didn't quite get as much love as the other light tanks. Now, I think the Wargaming want to keep light tanks in the game. Still, they're a little bit underpowered compared to medium tanks because they don't want them to become massively popular, because frankly, very good light tank players can kind of break some of the maps with intense view range and knowledge of spotting, mechanics, and some of the more important bush locations in the game. However, it's not enough to just be a scout sometimes. As we're clearly seeing in this game, you also have to be able to dish out the damage, because where am I really going to be able to get vision on Tundra? So unless your vehicle can be competitive at shooting out and dealing with the opponents on the enemy team and not just providing vision for your team, then how is the vehicle really going to stand up compared to the competition? And this is really where the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen kind of falls back. It doesn't have the best camo compared to something like a T10 LT, or even compared to something like a Sheridan, I believe. Probably about the right amount. The only thing that really rocks on this vehicle with regards to scouting is that it is the fastest tier 10 light tank with a top speed limit of 75 kilometers an hour, which really does allow it to get into position. And unlike something like the T10 LT, it has 420 meters view range. So that means that you can get up to easily 500 meters plus. And you can probably still use vertical stabilizers on this tank rather than having to drop them out to use vents if you're so inclined. Personally, for me, I'd probably like to use vents, coated optics, and a gun rammer, although some people might even drop a gun rammer on a vehicle like this to use vert stabs instead, just to make you more precise. But of course, losing a gun rammer means you're not going to be firing nearly as quickly. So, what else really sucks about the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, apart from the fact that it's a big box of a tank that's quite easy to hit at long range if you do get spotted, and also the fact that we mentioned its camo rating not being very good? Well, it's just the complete lack of armor that this vehicle has to be one of the most weakly armored tanks in the game. Unlike the T10 LT, which is vastly lower profile, has way better camo, has 100mm of frontal armor and 40mm at the side, which even means that you can side scrape against any gun that is 120mm or less. And so the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, well, I think it definitely gets an award for possibly looking like one of the coolest tanks, with its gun literally elevating through the roof so it can depress the gun to get 10 degrees. Yeah, it's kind of seeing as to why this thing is falling back a little bit compared to the competition. But let's see if I can take out a T10 LT on the enemy team right at the end of the game, or is he going to be able to escape and we're not going to be able to find him against the Oho? Ah, there we go. Maybe you shoot me once, I'm going to clutch shot you, take you out. Although it wasn't really kind of a big impact in the game, seeing he was right at the end. And one thing, again, why I feel this vehicle falls back is when you do end up in duels with vehicles like the T10 LT, they can just simply outclass you at the spotting at the beginning of the game due to their enhanced camo rating, and with armor that will pull off the occasional ricochet and just a flat out better damage per minute, you can find yourself losing pretty much most of your hit points that doesn't then allow you to use them at the end of the game when light tanks do become vastly more useful when there are net less enemies on the battlefield, thus meaning there are more gaps in the enemy team's vision for you to be able to take advantage of. But really, the real thing that holds the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen back, as if I haven't mentioned enough things in the first 4 minutes of this video, is the fact that its speciality is meant to be that it's the best sniping light tank. It has the best penetration on its standard rounds at 242, decent heat rounds at 280, and even some high penetration, high explosive rounds with 120mm of pen for 420 alpha damage. But the problem is that tier 10 light tanks, unlike any other tier and unlike any other class in the game, get horrendous drop-off for their shells over a long distance. And so that means that unless you're shooting at very lightly armored tanks like that tier 8 Soviet turreted Su-130PM, then sometimes your rounds just drop off to the point where they can no longer manage to penetrate. And unless you're willing to fire premium rounds at the target that don't lose any penetration over range, then you can really start to struggle. Now, what am I talking about with shell penetration drop-off? Well, with most classes in the game, you'll lose up to about 10% penetration over 500 meters distance. However, because Wargaming really didn't want tier 10 light tanks to be competitive against tier 10 medium tanks at long range in the sniping role, which is perfectly understandable and reasonable, they decided to make it so that they lose 25% of their penetration over range, which means that a vehicle like this dips below 200mm of penetration to be able to, which really holds them back from engaging heavy tanks, even lower tier heavy tanks, unless you get a complete flush side shot like we had against the Lerva there. So really, when you're playing a vehicle like this, what it comes down to is not trying to be the long-range sniper. You might as well play a medium. It's about trying to outplay the enemy light tanks and try to use your knowledge of bush mechanics to be able to shoot safely, just like we're going to do to the back of the Scorpion there. 440, that's a decent roll compared to the 420 average that these high penetration, high explosive rounds will be able to deal. And that does feel rather nice to hopefully, going to have to give a lot of lead though against that. And look, it doesn't even manage to penetrate the side of the Scorpion even with 120mm of pen, so we're going back to the good old APCR here. And really, unless you can get the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen into these glorious situations where you're trying to get at about 450 meters with decent view range up to 500 like I have on this tank, so you can be able to spot your opponents without them seeing you, and then you can then get out of the 445 meters maximum spotting distance to then be able to shoot them without them having any chance of spotting you at all, then it's just incredibly hard to be able to work this tank. And even though I feel that I'm a player who probably knows light tanks a little bit more, because they're definitely a class that I thoroughly enjoy, I do like a challenge in World of Tanks, and that's probably why I've been playing this vehicle quite a lot, seeing how it is the most underpowered tier 10 vehicle. I nearly said light tank, but it's not just the light tank. It's worse than all of the other self-propelled guns, medium tanks, heavy tanks, when it comes to their pure impact and being able to win the battle. Now, why is that? Well, that's because if we go on to the awesome What Life stats website, as we're going to be calling it, take a look at the win ratio of the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen compared to all of the other tanks. Yeah, it is the only tier 10 vehicle, literally the only tier 10 vehicle, with all the way at the top we've got all of the Clan Wars reward tanks, the Object 268 version 4 and the Object 430U, which we talked about. And the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen is the only one that has less than 47% wins on average. That's really rough. Now, obviously, that's because this vehicle is going to have to compete against T100 LTs, compete against Sheridans, compete against the AMX 13105s, which really does hold the vehicle back. But also, just sometimes you do get into those matchups where there isn't even a light tank on the enemy team, or sometimes there are 2 light tanks on your team and only 1 on the enemy team. And when that happens, sometimes you have to fight it out or compete against medium tanks, which can do 90% of the scouting role that you can do. Well, ouch. WT Health Panzer IV at the end of the game. But they can do 120, 130% of the damage dealing capacity that you can do in World of Tanks. And so that is what's really holding this vehicle back, is that Wargaming have tried to make it the best kind of sniping reconnaissance light tank. And it didn't work for the Leopard, as I've highlighted on this channel, and it certainly doesn't work for the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Which means that unless you get yourself in immensely favourable scenarios, like we just saw on Siegfried Line, where frankly the enemy light tank didn't even bother to contest the field, the most important flank for a light tank to compete for, it's just incredibly hard to have high impact in your rounds. And this was actually an ace tanker. That is a 1,155 base experience game to be able to get an ace. Yeah, the video that I featured last weekend on the Object 430U, where we got like 1,250 plus base experience, was actually a first class. And so the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, certainly a specialist tank, but a specialist tank that just doesn't seem to be performing in World of Tanks. And unless truly you are a masochist, this is probably one of the last vehicles that I would recommend for you to be able to get to. And I guess the only real hope for the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen is if Wargaming give it a little bit above buff. Now, what would I personally do to the vehicle? Well, I would either make it better at the scouting role, or by increasing its camera rating, or alternatively, I would make it better at the long range role. At the moment, it's kind of in between these two. It doesn't do anything specifically amazingly to justify itself. Alternatively, I guess the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen could just really hope that the new Tier 10 French wheeled vehicle, the EBR 105, is going to be completely tragic, and then maybe it'll end up beneath it, right? Either way, I'd be really interested to know what you all think about the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. Do you think it's as underpowered as the statistics are showing, or do you think it's a hidden gem that's just played by poor players? Anyway, that's it for today, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks showcase on twitch.tv/QuickieBaby. And this week, I want to take all of my Tier 8 premium tanks out onto the battlefield to give you a complete showcase. So if you've ever wondered which Tier 8 premium tank is the best one to get and why, or alternatively, see which ones you'd rather avoid, and then come along right now. I'm probably going to play through at least about 30 of them. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible right now on twitch.tv/QuickieBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.